Cherin enters the hall through the service entrance at precisely 8 in the morning. She adjusts the collar of her uniform dress, dark blue with a white apron, which she always ties tightly so nothing hangs loose. Her long braid of tight black curls hangs heavily down her back. She's accustomed to the weight. The house is quiet. Not just quiet, but somehow especially empty. She knows the owner, Yejun, has left. Last night, his assistant took the suitcase, and the black car drove out the gate. Cherin doesn't ask where or why. It's none of her business. She's here to tidy things up, make breakfast for little Ju Won, and make sure everything is in its place. And today, she will have a calm day. She walks through the living room, checking that the curtains are closed. Everything is fine. Then she heads to the kitchen to put the kettle on. Ju Won is still asleep. The nanny won't be here for another hour. Wu Cherin has time to do some wet cleaning in the office on the second floor, the place she usually goes to last, because Yejun often works late and doesn't like being interrupted. She climbs the stairs, the steps creaking under her weight as usual. 70 kilograms is no small weight, but she moves smoothly, knowing where to step without making noise. Over the 3 months of work, she's gotten to know this house like the back of her hand. But today something is wrong. Cherin stops at the top landing. The second floor corridor extends, and at the end is the door to the office. The door is slightly open. That's odd. Yejun always closes it, even when she leaves. She clearly remembers that last night before leaving. She checked all the locks, and the office door was locked. She takes a step, then another. The silence becomes thick, almost tangible. It seems to her that the air in the hallway is different, heavy, still. Rin listens. No sound, no footsteps, no voices, no rustling of pages. Only her own breath. She approaches the door and freezes. Her hand reaches for the frame. She peers through the crack between the door and the wall. It's dark inside, but from somewhere in the depths of the office comes a faint flickering light, a bluish glow, like from a screen left on standby. Cherin frowned. She knew for a fact that Yejun turned off all the electronics when he left. She checked it herself. She pushes the door. The door opens silently, and Cherin takes a step inside. The light she saw from the hallway wasn't coming from the screen alone. It was coming from the wall. She stops dead in her tracks. The entire far wall of the office, the one usually hidden behind dark wood panels, is now a solid canvas of monitors. 6 large screens, arranged in 2 rows. Each displays an image, black and white, crisp with a slight ripple of motion. Her own image. The top left screen shows the kitchen. She sees the kettle she left on the stove. On the right is the living room, sofas, armchairs, and an empty table. The middle screen shows the first-floor hallway she just passed through. The lower screens show her room in the service wing, the stairs she climbed, and Cherin glances at the largest screen in the center. There she is, right now, standing in the office, her mouth open. Cameras are watching her from everywhere. She sees her braid move when she turns her head. She sees her fingers grip the edge of her apron. She doesn't know how much this costs. A second? A minute? Her thoughts are jumbled. She's trying to figure out why all this is here. Who turned it on? Why are all the screens only showing the places where she usually cleans? As if someone had deliberately set up cameras to monitor her every move. Cherin takes a step back. Her heel hits something soft. The carpet. She almost loses her balance, but catches herself by grabbing the doorframe. She doesn't understand what's happening, but her body already knows. Something's wrong here. She needs to leave. She needs to call security. She needs to... Don't move. A voice comes from the corner of the office, quietly, calmly, but so that Cherin jumps up. Her heart sinks, and for a second, she finds it hard to breathe. She can't move. She can't even turn her head. A figure emerges from a dark corner of the office. First, Cherin sees only a silhouette, tall, thin, in dark loungewear. But when the figure steps forward and enters the flickering light of the monitors, she recognizes him. Yejun. He's here. He hasn't left. Cherin wants to say something, but the words get stuck in her throat. She looks at him with wide eyes, and her breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Yejun stops 3 steps away from her. He's dressed differently than usual. He's wearing a soft black t-shirt and loose trousers. His hair isn't combed back, but falls across his forehead. He looks homely, but that doesn't make him any less intimidating. His gaze is heavy, intense. He looks at her as if he can read her thoughts. Cherin notices the tattoo. She's seen it before, briefly, when Yejun unbuttoned the top button of his shirt on a hot day. But now, in this bluish light, the scorpion on his neck looks different. It's almost alive. The black lines curve when Yejun turns his head, and Che-rin feels like the sting is looking right at her. You weren't supposed to be here, he says, his voice even, emotionless. Che-rin opens her mouth, finally able to speak. You left, she breathes out. I saw the car. I came back last night, he interrupts. Through the service entrance. She doesn't understand. Why come back secretly? Why hide in her own home? Why watch her through cameras? She looks at the screens again. On each one is her, or places she's just been, or places she's planning to go. You were following me, Che says. Rin. That's not a question. She already knows the answer. Yejun is silent for a few seconds. Then he nods. Yes. Che-rin feels the floor give way beneath her feet. She leans her back against the doorframe as her legs begin to shake. It's not from fear. Or is it from fear? She can't tell. Why? She asks. Her voice is quiet, almost a whisper. Did I do something wrong? Yejun takes a step toward her, and she instinctively retreats, but he doesn't try to get closer. Instead, he closes the door she left open. The click of the lock sounds loud in the silence. Now the two of them are alone in the office. The two of them and 6 screens that continue to broadcast empty rooms. Sit down, Yejun says, pointing to a chair against the wall. Che-rin doesn't move. She looks at him, trying to figure out what to expect. He doesn't look angry. He doesn't look aggressive. But something about his calm frightens her more than if he were shouting. I won't hurt you, he adds. And there's something new in his voice. Something like weariness. Just sit down. Please. She sits down. The chair is soft, but she sits on the very edge, ready to jump up at any second. Yejun. He sits down opposite her, on the edge of the table. He folds his arms across his chest and looks at her point blank. You've been acting strange lately, he says. Che-rin blinks. Strange? You stay in rooms longer than necessary. You open drawers that aren't your responsibility. You look around as if you're looking for something. She wants to object, but he raises his hand, stopping her. I'm not accusing you yet. I'm simply explaining why I decided to check. Check? Che-rin feels something hot flare in her chest. It's resentment. You installed cameras. You watched my every move. You came back secretly to catch me? Yejun remains silent. His face remains calm, but something flickers in his eyes that she can't read. Yes, he says finally. I wanted to see what you do when you think the house is empty. Che-rin clenches her fist in her lap. She wants to get up and leave. She wants to abandon everything and never return to this house again. But she doesn't move. She looks at the screens, at herself from the outside, and understands that they won't let her out of here so easily. I didn't take anything, she says firmly. I didn't do anything. I just worked. Yejun tilts his head, the scorpion on his neck shimmering in the light of the screens. Then you don't mind answering a few questions? Che-rin nods. She has no choice, but she knows she has nothing to hide. Let her ask. Yejun stands up and walks over to the desk. He opens the top drawer and takes out a small notebook. Che-rin sees that the pages are covered with neat, even handwriting. 3 weeks ago, he begins, leafing through his notebook, a keychain went missing. A small silver one, shaped like a key. I don't know about any keychain, Che replies. Rin. It was in the drawer of the bedside table in the bedroom. You were cleaning the bedroom the day after I last saw it. I clean the bedroom every day. It's my job. Yejun doesn't react to her tone. He continues. 2 weeks ago, a pen, black, with an engraving. It was lying on the desk in this office. I dust the table every evening. I've never taken a pen from there. Last week, the air conditioning remote, from the living room. Che-rin looks at him in confusion. The remote? She remembers that recently she couldn't find the remote when she wanted to air out the rooms. She thought Ju Wan had misplaced it. Children often hide things. I didn't take the remote, she says. I don't even know why I needed it. Yejun closes his notebook. He looks at her for a long moment, and Che-rin realizes that he doesn't believe her. All these things disappeared during the days you were working, he says. No one else from the staff entered those rooms. What about Ju Wan? Che asks. Rin. He walks all over the house. Yejun shakes his head. Ju Wan is 5 years old. He doesn't come into my office unaccompanied, and he doesn't open the drawers in the bedroom. Che-rin wants to object, but falls silent. She understands that her words mean nothing now. He has a list. He has cameras. He has suspicions, and she is the only one who can be pointed to. I didn't take your things, she repeats, looking him straight in the eye. I've been working here for 3 months. I've never taken anything. Yejun is silent. Only the quiet hum of the screens can be heard in the office. Chirin looks at the screens. She looks at herself, sitting in her chair hunched over, her knuckles white-knuckled, gripping the armrests. She sees her eyes, wide, frightened, but not guilty. She knows she didn't take these things, but he doesn't know. "You've been following me for days," she says, her voice growing louder. "You came back secretly. You hid in my own office to catch me doing something, but you found nothing, because I had nothing to take." Yejun doesn't answer. "I come here at 8, Chi continues. Rin getting up from his chair. "I clean, I cook, I look after Juwon. I leave at 6. I don't take anything except the salary you pay me." She takes a step toward him, not aggressively, but confidently. The fear fades, leaving room for resentment and anger. "You could have just asked me. You could have called me and said, 'Chayreen, my things are missing.' I would have shown you my room, my bag, my pockets. But you chose to follow me like a criminal." Yejun looks at her, and for the first time, something resembling tension appears on his face. He's not used to being spoken to like this. Rin knows it, but she can't stop. "You humiliated me," she says. "You made me feel like a thief, and I was just doing my job." She falls silent. The room becomes quiet. So quiet that Che-rin can hear her heartbeat. Yejun looks away. He looks at the screens, then at the notebook in his hands, then back at her. "You're right," he says. Che-rin doesn't expect this. She freezes. "I should have asked," he continues, "but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to accuse an innocent person." "But you still accused," Che says quietly. "Rin, you just didn't say it out loud." Yejun is silent. He looks like he wants to say something, but can't find the words. Finally, he takes a step towards the door. "Show me your bag," he says. Che-rin looks at him in surprise. He doesn't say this as an order, more like a request, or as a last-ditch effort to make sure. She nods. She has nothing to fear. They leave the office and go downstairs. Che-rin leads him into the hallway, where she left her bag by the service entrance. It's a small black canvas bag. It contains her change of shoes, a bottle of water, a comb, her wallet, and her keys. She opens her bag and lays the contents out on the table. Yejun watches carefully, but doesn't touch the things with his hands. He simply watches. There's no key fob. There's no handle. The remote wouldn't fit in such a small bag, even if she'd put it there. Yejun shifts his gaze from the things to Che-rin. There's something new in his eyes, something she hasn't seen before. Awkwardness. "There's nothing here," she says. "I see," he replies. He takes a step back and runs his hand over his face, the gesture of a tired man. Rin sees his face change. The severity disappears. Something human appears. "There's no evidence," he admits. "There's no evidence against you." He says this as if he's speaking to himself, as if he's going over the facts in his head, and can't find a single one that would confirm his suspicions. Che-rin packs her things back into her bag. Her hands are no longer shaking. She feels strange, empty, and a little bitter. "Can I go?" she asks. Yejun looks at her. He hesitates. "No," he says. "Wait." Che-rin freezes with the bag in her hands. "Did you find something in my bag?" she asks. "You saw for yourself. There's nothing there." "I know," Yejun says. "But it's not enough." She doesn't understand. "He said himself there's no evidence. What more does he want?" Yejun looks at her, and his gaze grows heavy again. But now there's no suspicion in it. There's something else. Determination. "If you didn't take these things," he says, "then someone else did. And if that someone works in the house, they could have planted them on you." Che-rin blinks. She hadn't thought about that. "I want to check your room," Yejun continues. "Not because I don't trust you, but because if those things show up there, it means someone's trying to set you up." Che-rin stands and looks at him, trying to figure out if he's being sincere. His voice is even, but there's something in his eyes that makes her think. He doesn't want to blame her. He wants to make sure. "Okay," she says. "Let's go. I'll show you everything myself." She turns and walks toward the service wing. Yejun follows her. They pass through the kitchen, past the stairs, and stop in front of her room. Che-rin opens the door and steps inside. The room is small but clean. A bed, a nightstand, a small closet, a chair, nothing extra. "Look," she says, opening the closet. "Here are my clothes. Here are my things." Yejun peers inside. He examines the shelves, looks under the bed, opens the nightstand. Che-rin stands at the door and looks at him. She's not afraid. She has nothing to hide. But just as Yejun bends down to look under the bed, A rustling sound is heard in the hallway. Both freeze. The rustling is repeated, quiet, cautious, but distinct. The sound comes from the hallway, not far from Che's room. Rin. Yejun straightens up and turns his head toward the door. His face instantly changes. The relaxation disappears, replaced by tension. Rin sees his jaw clench. "Did you hear?" he asks in a whisper. She nods. Her heart starts beating faster again. They both know there shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Ju Wan is sleeping on the second floor. The nanny hasn't arrived yet. Security is outside. But there was a rustling sound, and it was very close. Yejun takes a step towards the exit of the room. Che Rin instinctively steps back, making way for him. He steps out into the corridor and freezes, listening. Silence. But Che Rin hears it too. Somewhere at the end of the corridor, where the turn leads to the stairs to the second floor, a faint sound of breathing can be heard. Someone is hiding around the corner. Yejun looks at her and puts his finger to his lips. She understands. Be silent. He moves along the wall. His steps are silent. She doesn't even hear his feet touch the floor. Cherin stands in the doorway of her room, unsure what to do. Should she follow? Run? Call security? She watches as Yejun disappears around the corner. A second passes, another, and suddenly she hears his voice. Not stern, not angry, surprised. Ju Wan? Cherin runs out into the hallway and turns the corner. There, by the stairs, stands a little boy in pajamas. His black hair is tousled, his eyes wide with fear. He is clutching something in his hands, pressing it to his chest. Yejun stands in front of him, squatting down. "What are you doing here?" he asks. His voice is quiet, but there's tension in it. Ju Wan is silent. He looks at his father, then at Che. Rin standing behind him, his fingers tightening around the object in his hands. Che Rin steps forward and sees what he's holding. This is the same remote control from the air conditioner. Her heart skips a beat. Yejun notices too. He looks at the remote, then at his son, then at Che and Ju Wan, he says slowly. "Where did you get this?" The boy presses his lips together and lowers his head. He's not crying, but it's clear he's scared. Che-rin looks at both of them, and the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place in her head. Missing things. A house full of interesting objects. A 5-year-old boy who loves to explore everything around him. She squats down next to Yejun and smiles softly at Ju Wan. "Hello," she says quietly. "Did you take the remote?" Ju Wan looks up at her. He looks wary, but then slowly nods. "It's beautiful," the boy whispers. The buttons there light up. Che-rin looks at Yejun. She sees a whole range of emotions in his eyes. Surprise, relief, awkwardness, and it seems, something akin to shame. Now everything falls into place. Che-rin looks at the remote control in Ju Wan's hands. The boy is still clutching it to his chest, as if afraid it will be taken away from him. "Show me where you keep your things," she says softly. "Just show me, okay?" Ju Wan looks at his father. Yejun stands straight, his face hard to read. He doesn't look angry, but Che-rin watches him clench and unclench his fingers. It's the only thing that betrays his tension. "Daddy won't scold you," Che adds. "Rin." She says it quietly, so that only the boy can hear. Ju Wan looks at her for a few seconds. Then he nods slowly. He turns and starts walking up the stairs, his small feet in soft slippers, stepping carefully but confidently. Rin follows him. Yejun follows her. They go up to the second floor and walk down the hallway to the children's wing. Everything here is arranged differently than the rest of the house. The walls are light. The floor is covered with a soft carpet with a pattern of cars and clouds. The door to Ju Wan's room is slightly open. The boy pushes it with his shoulder and steps inside, full of books and toys, neatly arranged. Rin knows this room. She cleans it every day, but today she looks at it differently. She looks for something she hadn't noticed before. Ju Wan walks to his nightstand, a low cabinet next to his bed. He opens the top drawer and pauses, as if hesitant. Then he steps aside and looks at Che. "Rin." "There," he says. Che-rin steps forward. The drawer isn't fully open. The edge of something is visible through the crack. She leans over and carefully pulls the drawer toward her. Inside, she sees a remote control. Not the one Ju Wan is holding in his hands now. The other one. The one that went missing last week. It's lying at the very top, right on top of a stack of papers. Che-rin turns to Yejun. He's standing by the door, looking at the box. She sees his expression change. First surprise, then understanding. then something akin to relief. But this is just the beginning. Chireen opens the drawer completely. She freezes. There's a whole world inside. Small, neatly organized, but not at all childish. Here's a keychain. Silver, small. It hangs from a hook that Ju Won apparently attached to the inside of the drawer with tape. Here's a pen with an engraving. Black, heavy. It's in a plastic cup, which I saw Rin in the kitchen before. Here's the air conditioner remote, the one they found in the boy's hands. But there's another remote already in the drawer, for the TV in the living room. There are also a few coins, a beautiful button, a metal lid from some box, a small flashlight that hung on the keys to the pantry, and even an old desk calendar with a picture of mountains. All these things are arranged with amazing precision, not piled up, but standing, lying, or hanging in a specific order. It's as if Juwon is creating a museum, or a collection. Chae-rin looks at this and doesn't know what to say. She turns to Ye-jun. He stands motionless. His face is like a mask now, but Chae-rin sees the corner of his mouth twitch. He looks at the drawer, at the things he'd been searching for all over the house, the things that had made him suspect the honest man. They're here, all here. That's all, Ju-won says quietly. He stands by the bed and looks up at his father. I didn't break it. I just took it to look. Chae-rin squats down to be at the boy's eye level. It's not your fault, she says. Just tell us why you're doing this. Ju-won doesn't answer right away. He looks at Chae-rin, then at her father, then back at her. His small fingers fiddle with the hem of her pajamas. Ye-jun takes a step forward. Chae-rin sees him about to say something, probably to ask sternly, as he usually does. She raises her hand. It's a subtle movement, but Ye-jun notices it and stops. Let me talk to him, says Chae-rin quietly. Please. Ye-jun looks at her for a few seconds. Then he nods and moves to the window. He leans his shoulder against the wall and crosses his arms over his chest. He watches. Chae-rin turns to Ju-won. She smiles softly, without strain. Tell me about your treasures, she says. They are very beautiful, especially the keychain. Ju-won looks at her suspiciously, but she can see that he's pleased that someone has noticed his collection. There's still a little stone there, he says, but it fell under the bed. Do you want to show me everything? The boy nods. He goes to the nightstand and begins laying things out on the bed. He does so carefully, as if every movement is important. Chae-rin sits on the edge of the bed and watches. Ye-jun watches too, but keeps his distance. Ju-won arranges the items in a row. Then he climbs onto the bed from the other side and pulls the blanket up to his chin. Now he looks at Chae-rin peeked out from under the blanket. Only her eyes were visible. Curious, a little scared, but no longer so wary. Won't you tell Dad to pick it up? He asks in a whisper. Chae-rin looks at Ye-jun. He heard. She sees his face change, but he remains silent. I won't tell, says Chae-rin, but you have to explain why you need all this. Ju-won is silent for a long time. Chae-rin doesn't rush. She sits quietly and waits. Ye-jun is also silent. Chae-rin senses his presence at the window, but doesn't turn around. The most important thing now is to give the boy time. Finally, Ju-won begins to speak. There's a city where Dad works, he says. I saw it on TV. There are tall buildings and cars and lights. Dad said he's the boss there. Chae-rin nods. She doesn't know what city it is, but she doesn't interrupt. I want my own city, Ju-won continues. But I don't have things like Dad. I only have toys. And toys, they're not real. He sticks his hand out from under the blanket and points to the items laid out. And this is all real. This keychain looks like a key to a big house. The pen is like Dad's when he writes important papers. The remote controls are like control panels. A real city should have real things. Chae-rin listens and feels something tighten in her chest. She looks at the little boy who wants to build his own world from the objects he finds important. Do you want to be like Dad? She asks. Ju-won nods. Dad leaves early and comes home late. He always has things to do. I thought if I had the same things, I could stay busy too. And then Dad would spend time with me because we would be doing the same thing. He says it simply, without offense, without whims. He simply explains how everything works in his head. Chae-rin swallows. She feels a heavy weight growing inside her. She turns to look at Ye-jun. He stands by the window, and she sees his profile. His face has changed. The sternness is gone. The tension is gone. He looks at his son, and in his eyes is what Chae-rin has never seen it there. Pain. Yejun moves away from the window. He takes 2 steps toward the bed and stops. Chae-rin sees him clench his jaw as if he's holding something back. Ju-won, he says. His voice is hoarse. Come here. The boy peeks out from under the blanket. He looks at his father warily, but sees that he's not angry. Slowly, he crawls out from under the blanket and approaches the edge of the bed. Yejun squats down. Now he and his son are on the same level. I didn't know, he says. I didn't know you thought that. Ju-won is silent. He looks at his father, his lips trembling. Are you angry? The boy asks. Yejun shakes his head. No, I'm not angry. He reaches out and places his palm on his son's head. Ju-won presses himself against him, burying his face in his shoulder. Chae-rin looks at them and realizes she's the odd one out. She quietly gets out of bed and takes a step toward the exit. I'll wait downstairs, she says. Yejun looks up at her. There's gratitude in his eyes, and something else, something she can't quite place. She leaves the room and quietly closes the door behind her. Chae-rin goes downstairs and into the kitchen. She puts on the kettle and gets out the cups. Her hands move automatically, but her conversation with Ju-won still plays in her head. She thinks about how the boy collected these things, how he carefully arranged them in the nightstand, how he wanted to be like his father. She pours herself some tea and sits down at the table. She waits. 20 minutes pass, maybe half an hour. Chae-rin doesn't look at her watch. She simply sits and looks out the window at the street, where the sky is slowly brightening. Finally, she hears footsteps. Yejun is coming down the stairs. He enters the kitchen and stops at the door. Ju-won fell asleep, he says. I read to him. Chae-rin nods. Would you like some tea? She asks, standing up. Yejun looks at her. He doesn't answer her question. Instead, he walks over to the table and sits down opposite her. I have to apologize, he says. Chae-rin freezes with the teapot in his hands. I blamed you, Yejun continues. I followed you. I humiliated you. And all this time, it was my own son's fault. He says it evenly, without unnecessary emotion. But Chae-rin can hear how difficult it is for him to say these words. You didn't know, she says. It could have happened to anyone, but it happened to you. And I had no right to do this. Yejun looks at her, and Chae-rin sees that he truly regrets it. Not because he was caught, but because he realized how wrong he was. He gets up from the table and leaves the kitchen. Chae-rin hears him go into the hallway, then returns. He's holding a white envelope. He places the envelope on the table in front of Chae-rin. This is for you, he says. Chae-rin looks at the envelope. She doesn't take it. What is this? She asks. A bonus, Yejun says, for not deserving such treatment. Chae-rin shakes his head. I didn't ask for a bonus. I know, but I ask you to accept it. He sits back down in the chair and looks at her. Chae-rin sees that he will not back down. She takes the envelope. She doesn't open it. She just places it next to the cup. Thank you, she says. Yejun nods, but he doesn't leave. He sits and looks at her, as if deciding something. And one more thing, he says. I'm changing my schedule. Chae-rin raises her eyebrows. Your workday now ends at 4 o'clock, Yejun continues. Your pay remains in full. Chae-rin is silent. She doesn't understand. Yejun explains. You work the hardest in the house. You come in earlier than everyone else and leave later than everyone else. I saw it on the cameras. He pauses, realizing what he just said. His face tightens. I'll remove the cameras, he adds quickly. All but the ones at the entrances. Chae-rin looks at him, unsure what to say. Shortened hours. Full pay. A bonus. It's more than she expected. You don't have to, she says. I know, Yejun replies. But I want to. He gets up from the table. The conversation is over. Yejun goes to his office. Chae-rin is left alone in the kitchen. She looks at the envelope. Then she puts it in her bag without opening it. She doesn't need the money now. She needs time to process everything that happened. She stands up and begins to clear away the cups. Her hands move slowly, she thinks. This morning, she walked into this house, confident it would be empty. She knew it would be a quiet day. Instead, she was accused of theft. A stash of belongings was found in a 5-year-old boy's room, and she received a bonus and new working conditions. And all this in a few hours. Chae-rin puts the cups in the cupboard and looks out the window. She thinks about Yejun, about how he squatted in front of his son, about how he apologized, about how awkward it was for him to say those words. She saw him differently today, not as a stern boss who looked down on everyone, But as a man who had made a mistake and admitted it, Chirin feels the tension between them begin to melt. Something new is taking its place. She doesn't know what to call it. Interest? Affection? Or simply respect for the fact that he was able to apologize? She doesn't know. But she feels that from this day on, everything will be different. The next morning, Chirin arrives at the house at 8 in the morning. She enters through the service entrance, as usual, and the first thing she does is look at the table in the hallway. There is a piece of paper lying there. She recognizes the handwriting. Neat, even. With pressure. Yejun. Chirin takes the piece of paper and reads it. Chirin, I ask that you please stop cleaning Ju-won's nightstand. It's his personal space. If it gets too messy, just tell me. Thank you. Yeah, June. She reads the note twice. Then she smiles. He leaves his son as hiding place. He doesn't take things away, doesn't forbid him from collecting them. He simply asks him not to touch them. Chirin folds the note and puts it in her apron pocket. She heads to the kitchen to start her day. She feels at peace. As she goes up to the second floor to air out the rooms, she passes Ju-won's door. It's ajar. She peers inside. The boy sits on the bed and lays out his treasures. He sees her and smiles. You came, he says. I've arrived, Che replies. Rin, how did you sleep? Ju-won shrugs. Then he leans over to the nightstand and pulls out a pebble, the very one he said fell under the bed. Look, I found it, he says, handing the stone to Che. Rin, it's for your collection, if you want. Che-rin looks at the small, smooth stone. She takes it. Thank you, she says. I'll take care of it. Ju-won nods and returns to his things. Che-rin continues down the hallway. She feels something new connecting with this house. Not just work, something more. Several days pass. Che-rin is adjusting to her new schedule. She finishes work at 4 and goes home. Home is a small room in the service wing, but she calls it that now without irony. She likes it here. Ju-won now often searches for her himself. He comes into the kitchen while she's cooking and sits on a high stool at the counter. He tells her about his new finds. I found an old battery under the sofa in the living room, he says one day. It's round and flat, like a coin. This is an important find, Chai answers seriously. Rin, these are the kind of batteries you find in watches. Ju-won looks at her with respect. She understands. He starts showing her his new things before hiding them in the nightstand. Rin becomes the keeper of his secrets. She doesn't tell Yejun that the boy found an old mailbox key or broken headphones. She simply listens and nods. When I build a city, Ju-won says, laying out his treasures in front of her, you will live there. I will give you the most beautiful house. Che-rin smiles. Thank you, I agree. She doesn't notice Yejun standing in the kitchen doorway, listening to their conversation. She only notices him when he coughs to announce his presence. Che-rin turns around. Yejun is standing there with a cup in his hands. I'm going for coffee, he says. Am I disturbing you? No, Che answers. Rin, we were just talking. Yejun nods. He goes into the kitchen, pours himself some coffee, but doesn't leave. He sits at the table and looks at his son. What are you showing, Che? Rin, he asks. Ju-won looks at Che-rin, asking at permission. She nods slightly. My treasures, says Ju-won. I'm building a city. Yejun looks at the items laid out. An old key, a battery, a box lid. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't call them trash. It's a nice city, he says. When you finish it, will you show it to me? Ju-won is shining. I'll show you. Che-rin doesn't notice the changes right away. At first, she thinks she's imagining things. Yejun now frequently appears where she works. He comes into the kitchen while she's cooking, passes through the living room while she's dusting, and comes down to the laundry room while she's sorting laundry. He always finds an excuse. Forgot his phone, needs water, looking for some paper. But Chirin sees. He's not looking at his phone. He's looking at her. It's not the heavy, suspicious look he had before. Different. She doesn't know what to call it. He's just looking, as if she's become interesting to him. One day, she lingers in the kitchen longer than usual, sorting through groceries. She senses someone standing in the doorway. She looks up. Yejun stands leaning against the doorframe, holding an empty cup. This is the 3rd time you've come for coffee, says Che. Rin, and the cup is empty. He looks at the cup, then at her. I noticed, he says, and he leaves. Che-rin stands by the table and watches him go. She doesn't understand what's happening, but she senses something changing between them. That evening, Yejun had to leave. Che-rin knows this. She saw the driver preparing the car. She thinks the house will be empty again. She's preparing dinner for herself and Ju, Won. The boy is sitting at the table drawing. Rin places a plate of soup and bread in front of him. Dad left, says Ju Won. He said he'd be back late. I know, Che answers. Rin, we'll have dinner ourselves. She sits down opposite the boy and begins to eat. The house is quiet. The only sound is the clatter of spoons on plates. 15 minutes later, she hears the sound of the front door opening. Che-rin looks up. She wasn't expecting anyone. Ye-jun enters the kitchen. He's wearing a business suit, but his tie is loose and his shirt sleeves are rolled up. He looks tired. I thought you left, says Che. Rin, I changed my mind, he replies. I rescheduled the meeting. He looks at the table, at the 2 plates, at his son, who is already finishing his soup, at Che. Rin, who froze with a spoon in her hand. I didn't cook for 3, she says. Ye-jun is silent for a second. Then he sits down at the table. I'm not hungry, he says. I'm just going to sit. The 3 of them are sitting at the kitchen table. Ju Won finishes his soup and starts talking about his drawing. Ye-jun listens. Rin looks at them and feels a strange calm. She gets up to clear the plates. Ye-jun catches her eye. Leave it, he says. Sit. Che-rin sits back down. Ju Won finishes his story and asks permission to go play. Ye-jun nods. The boy runs off, leaving the 2 of them alone. The kitchen becomes quiet. Che-rin doesn't know what to say. Ye-jun is silent too. I rarely sit like this, he says finally. Just at my desk. Not in my office, not in a restaurant. Just in the kitchen. Che-rin nods. It's nice, he adds. She looks at him and sees that he's truly relaxed. For the first time in her time working here, he looks like a normal person. Not a boss. Not someone in charge of something big and dangerous. Just a man sitting in the kitchen after a long day. You're tired, says Che. Rin? Yes, Ye-jun admits. But I don't want to leave now. He looks at her, and Che-rin feels something change in the air. Not tension, not awkwardness. Something different, warm. She gets up to pour him some tea. Che-rin places the cup in front of Ye-jun. He takes it, and at that moment, she notices his hand. There's an old scar on my right palm, just under my thumb. A white stripe on dark skin. The scar is old, but the mark remains visible. Che-rin looks at him longer than necessary. Ye-jun notices her gaze. Old, he says. He doesn't hide his hand. He doesn't put it in his pocket. He just holds the cup, letting her examine it. What happened? Che asks. Rin. She's not sure she has the right to ask, but the question is already out of her mouth. Ye-jun is silent for a few seconds. Then he says, Tuition fees. Che-rin waits for him to continue, but he doesn't explain. She doesn't insist. She understands there are things he's not telling her, and this is one of them. How long ago? She asks instead. Ye-jun answers, Before I became who I am. He takes a sip of tea and looks at her. There's something in his eyes she can't read. Not pain, not bitterness. Rather, the calm confidence of a man who's been through something and still stands. Aren't you afraid of me? He asks suddenly. Che-rin looks at him, at the scar on his arm, at the tattoo on his neck, visible through the collar of his unbuttoned shirt, at his tired but calm face. No, she says. I'm not afraid. Ye-jun looks at her for a long moment. Then he nods. Okay, he says. He finishes his tea and gets up. Good night, Che. Rin. Good night. He's leaving. Yay. Rin is left alone in the kitchen. She looks at the empty cup, at the chair he sat on, and feels her heart beating faster than usual. She doesn't know what it means, but she knows that from that day on, everything changed. A week passes since that evening in the kitchen. Che-rin is settling into a new rhythm. She arrives at 8 and leaves at 4. A strange balance settles between her and Ye-jun. They see each other more often, but speak little. He comes into the kitchen for coffee. She nods. He nods. That's enough. On Wednesday morning, everything changes. Che-rin is just starting to clean the living room when she hears voices. Not just one, but several. And they're coming from the study on the 2nd floor. This is unusual. Ye-jun usually works in the study alone. She climbs the stairs. The door to the office is open, and she sees 3 men inside. Ye-jun is standing at the desk. Opposite him is the head of security, a man in a black suit, whom Che-rin saw him several times. The 3rd man was unknown to her. The voices sound tense. Che-rin doesn't want to eavesdrop, but she can't help but hear. The key card is missing, says the head of security. It was there last night. This morning it's gone. I know, Yejun replies. His voice is even, but Che-rin feels cold in him. There was only a limited circle of people in the house, the security chief continues. You! Your son! The nanny! The maid! Che-rin freezes on the stairs. She hears her name. Ju Won is 5 years old, Yejun says. The nanny didn't come up to the second floor yesterday. So, the maid remains. Che-rin takes a step forward. She doesn't know why. Maybe to justify herself, maybe to say she didn't take anything. But she doesn't have time to open her mouth. Che-rin didn't take the card, Yejun says. The voice sounds firm. Without hesitation, the head of security looks at him with surprise. But sir, we have procedures. We must check. I said she didn't take it. Yejun's voice takes on a steely edge. Rin hears it even from the stairs. The security chief hears it too. He falls silent. Search the office, Yejun continues. Check everything, but don't touch the maid. Che-rin stands on the stairs, her back pressed against the wall. She doesn't know what to feel. Relief? Surprise? Yejun just defended her in front of his men. Without asking, without checking. He simply said, she didn't take it. She quietly goes downstairs so that no one notices that she heard the conversation. An hour later, the head of security leaves. Che-rin watches him leave the house, sullen and dissatisfied. She continues cleaning the living room, but her thoughts are elsewhere. She hears footsteps on the stairs. Yejun comes down. He enters the living room and stops. You heard everything, he says. It's not a question. Che-rin nods. She continues dusting the shelf, but her movements become slower. The map is indeed missing, Yejun says. I checked. It's not there. I didn't take it, says Che. Rin. She turns to him, looks him straight in the eyes. Yejun looks back. I know, he says. Che-rin sees his face. She sees that he's not saying this because he's 100% certain. He's saying this because he chooses to believe, despite the lack of evidence, despite the fact that the disappearance occurred during her working hours. He chooses to trust. Thank you, says Che. Rin. Yejun nods. He turns to leave, but stops. I'll tell security that the card was found, that it fell behind the safe. But she wasn't found, says Che. Rin. I know, but it will give us time. He's leaving. Che. Rin remains in the living room, rag in hand. She realizes this isn't the end. Someone really did take the map, and that someone is still in the house. The day drags on slowly. Che-rin does her job, but keeps looking back. She feels like she's being watched. Not by Yejun, but by someone else. She finishes cleaning at 4 o'clock, as usual. She goes to her room to change. She hangs her uniform in the closet and puts on her jacket. And he feels something hard in his pocket. Che-rin freezes. She slowly pulls the object out. Key card. Small, gray, with a chip. The very one they were looking for this morning. Che-rin looks at her, and her breath catches. She didn't take this card. She didn't even know it existed until this morning. But the card is in her jacket pocket. In her personal jacket, which hung in her room while she worked. Someone came into her room. Someone put a map in her pocket. Che-rin stands in the middle of the room, clutching the map in her hand. Her heart beats fast and loud. She thinks about what would have happened if she hadn't found it now. If the guards had searched her room, if they had found the map in her pocket, she would have been fired. And maybe not only fired. She understands what she must do. Che-rin goes up to the second floor after 8 in the evening. She knows Yejun is in the office. She saw a light under the door. She knocks. Come in, she hears. She opens the door. Yejun is sitting at the table. He's not wearing a jacket, only a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looks at her in surprise. Che-rin, what happened? She enters the office and closes the door behind her. She approaches the desk and places the keycard on the wooden surface. The map lies between them. Gray. Innocent. But Che-rin looks at her like she's a snake. I found this in my jacket pocket, she says. Yejun looks at the map, then at her. His face changes. Surprise gives way to understanding, and then to something more serious. I didn't take it, says Che-rin. Someone planted it. Someone came into my room while I was working. Yejun is silent. He takes the card, examines it, and turns it over in his fingers. There's a stranger in the house, says Che-rin. Or not a stranger. Someone you trust. Yejun looks up at her. She sees his jaw clench. She sees the muscles in his neck tense near the tattoo. You came to me, he says. You came to me yourself, although you could have thrown away the card and pretended you didn't know anything. I don't steal, says Che-rin. I won't pretend. I want you to know the truth. Yejun looks at her for a long moment. Then he nods. I know, he says. Thank you for coming. Yejun gets up from the table and goes to the window. Che-rin remains standing at the table. She doesn't know if she can sit down. He doesn't offer. There's security at the entrance, he says without turning around. I trust these people, but maybe I'm wrong. He turns to her. I've noticed something strange in the last few weeks. The guards have been changing more frequently than usual. One of them might have let someone in, or one of them might have. He doesn't finish. Che-rin understands. What are you going to do? She asks. Yejun looks at her, his eyes filled with decision. Nothing. Bye. Che-rin doesn't understand. We won't call anyone, Yejun explains. We won't interrogate the guards. If whoever did this realizes we're looking for them, they'll disappear or do something else. What then? We'll wait and observe. Yejun comes closer to her. Che-rin can smell it. Coffee and something else she can't identify. I ask you not to tell anyone yet, he says. Not even Ju-won. Especially Ju-won. Okay, Che replies. Rin. And I ask you to help me. She looks at him. He is serious. We need to pretend nothing happened, Yejun says. You come to work as usual. Do your job. And I'll keep an eye on you. Follow whom? For everyone. But especially for anyone who wants to check if the trap worked. Che-rin nods. She doesn't ask what will happen if the trap is triggered. She doesn't want to know. The next day, Yejun comes up with a plan. He explains it to Che. Rin is in the evening, when Ju-won is already asleep. They are sitting in the kitchen, and he is drawing a diagram of the house on a piece of paper. You have to pretend to leave, he says. At 4 o'clock, as usual, you leave through the service entrance. But instead of leaving, you go back through the back stairs to the guest room. Che-rin looks at the diagram. The guest room is next to hers. You wait there, Yejun continues. You watch. If anyone comes into your room, you call me. You don't interfere. What if someone comes into the wrong room? She asks. Rin. Yejun looks up at her. I'll be in the office. I only left the cameras in the hallways. I'll be watching. Che-rin nods. She thinks about how, just a few weeks ago, he was watching her through these cameras, and now they're tracking someone else together. Aren't you afraid? Yejun asks. Che-rin looks at him. There's concern in his eyes. Real human concern. I'm scared, she admits. But I want to know who did it. Yejun nods. He puts the diagram away. Tomorrow, he says. At 4 o'clock. The next day at 4 o'clock, Che-rin leaves through the service entrance. She puts on her jacket, zips it up, and walks down the path to the gate. But instead of going outside, she turns the corner of the house and re-enters through a small door. The back staircase leads to the guest room. Che-rin rises quietly, trying not to make any noise. The room is small, with one bed and a tall window overlooking the hallway. She sits down on a chair by the door and waits. The hours drag on slowly. 5 o'clock, 6, 7. Che-rin hears the nanny leave. Hears Yejun go down to the kitchen to get Ju-won's dinner. Hears the boy running down the hallway. At 9, everything is quiet. Ju-won goes to bed. Yejun goes up to the office. Che-rin sits in the darkness. She doesn't turn on the light, so no one will notice her presence. She peers through the crack between the door and the frame. At 1 in the morning, she begins to think that nothing will happen, that she has wasted the evening. At 2 o'clock, she hears footsteps. Quiet. Cautious. Someone is walking down the first-floor corridor. Che-rin tenses. She peers through the crack and sees a figure, a man, in a security uniform. She recognizes him. He's one of the far-flung guards, working the outer perimeter. She's seen him several times, but never spoken to him. He climbs the stairs to the second floor, passes the guest room, heads toward her room. Che-rin clutches her phone. She types a message to Yejun. Coming to my room. Outer perimeter guard. The answer comes a second later. I'm here. Don't move. Che-rin peers through the crack. The guard approaches the door to her room. He glances around, checking to make sure no one is there. Then he takes something out of his pocket. It looks like a master key. He opens the door and goes inside. Che-rin counts the seconds. 5, 10, 15. And suddenly she hears a voice. Not from her room, from the hallway. You have the wrong door. Yejun is standing at the end of the corridor. Che-rin can't see his face, only his silhouette. But she hears his voice. Calm, cold, like when he spoke to the head of security. The guard rushes out of her room. He sees Yejun and freezes. Sir, he begins. Yejun says, follow me. He turns and walks toward the office. The guard stands still for a few seconds, then follows him. Che-rin remains in the darkness. Her hands are shaking. She doesn't know what will happen now, but she knows it's over. Che-rin sits in the guest room for another hour, maybe two. She doesn't look at the clock. She just sits and waits. Finally, the door opens. Yejun stands on the threshold. His face is calm, but she can see that he is tired. "It's over," he says. "You can come out." Che-rin walks out into the hallway. She looks at her room's door. It's closed. "What will happen to him?" she asks. Yejun looks at her. She sees that he doesn't want to answer. "He won't work in security anymore," he says. "And he won't be in the city anymore." Che-rin doesn't ask for details. She doesn't want to know. "He said someone paid him to set you up," Yejun continues. "So you'd get fired. Or worse." "Who?" He doesn't know the name. "Everything is done through an intermediary. I'll sort it out." Yejun looks at her, and suddenly does what Che-rin doesn't expect it. He smiles. Not wide, not cheerful, thin at the corners of the lips, but it is a smile. "You weren't afraid to come to me," he says. "You didn't throw away the map. You didn't run away. You stayed and helped." "I did what was right," says Che-rin. "Not everyone does what's right," Yejun replies. "Thank you." He says it quietly, but Che-rin hears the weight in his voice. These aren't just words. This is gratitude from a man unaccustomed to giving thanks. 3 days later, Yejun calls Che-rin goes to the office. She goes up to the second floor with a slight feeling of unease. "Is everything okay?" He sits at the table, dressed in his usual formal suit, but his face is softer than usual. "Sit down," he says, pointing to a chair. Che-rin sits down. "The security has been completely replaced," Yejun says. "New people, new system. This mustn't happen again." Che-rin nods. "And I want to offer you something," he continues. "The position of house manager." Che-rin freezes. "You know this house better than anyone," Yejun says. "You know how everything works. Ju-won trusts you. And I trust you." He opens the desk drawer and takes out the key. "You'll have your own room. Not in the service wing. A proper room, with a window overlooking the courtyard." Che-rin looks at the key. She doesn't know what to say. "You don't have to agree," Yejun adds. "But I'd be glad if you stayed." She looks at him, at his face, which now lacks any trace of severity, at the key lying on the table, at the tattoo on his neck, which no longer seems ominous to her. "I agree," says Che-rin. Yejun nods. He hands her the key. Their fingers almost touch. "Welcome to your new position," he says. The first day off in the new position falls on Saturday. Che-rin wakes up in her new room. It's spacious, with a large window overlooking the courtyard. The sun shines directly onto the bed. She hears a knock on the door. "Che-rin!" Ju-won shouts. "Are you up?" She opens the door. The boy stands there, fully equipped, jacket, hat, boots. "We're going to the park. Dad said you're coming with us." Che-rin looks at him, then at the hallway. Yejun is standing at the end of the hallway. He's not wearing a suit. He's wearing a regular dark jacket, jeans, and sneakers. Rin sees him like this for the first time. "Ju-won's right," Yejun says. "We're going to the park. If you want to, of course." "He wants it!" Ju-won shouts, grabbing Che-rin by the hand. "Get dressed faster!" Che-rin smiles. She quickly gets ready, putting on comfortable pants, a sweater, and a jacket. The three of them leave the house. It's sunny in the park. Ju-won runs ahead along the path, pointing out birds and squirrels. Che-rin and Yejun walk side by side. "It's weird to see you without a suit," Che says. "Rin. It's weird being without a suit," Yejun replies. "I almost forgot what it's like." He looks at his son, who is trying to climb a short tree. "He's happy," Yejun says. "Thank you." "For what?" Che asks in surprise. "Rin. For being with us." They walk around the park for over an hour. Ju-won manages to climb all the slides, feed the ducks, and lose the mitten that Che-rin finds it under the bench. Finally, they sit down on a bench by the lake. Ju-won sits between them, dangling his legs. "Che-rin," Yejun says. She turns to him. He looks at her, and his gaze is different than usual. It's honest, open. "I want to thank you," he says. "Not for your work, for making our house warmer." Che-rin is silent. She feels her heart begin to beat faster. "Ju-won waits for you every morning," Yejun continues. "He tells you about his discoveries. He trusts you." "And you?" asks Che-rin. "Do you trust me?" Yejun looks at her, at her face, at her braid, at her hands folded in her lap. Yes, he says. I trust you. Ju Wan, who was listening to their conversation, suddenly jumps up. Che Rin, he says seriously. Are you our family now? Che Rin looks at the boy, then at Yejun. He doesn't look away. If you want, Yejun says quietly. If you both want. Ju Wan looks at Che Rin, looks at Yejun with hope, and in his eyes, she sees something more than just trust. I want to, she says. They return to the mansion in the evening. The sun is already setting, and the windows of the house are glowing with a warm yellow light. Cherine stops at the gate. She looks at the house that 3 months ago seemed like just a place to work. Enormous, austere, empty. Now he is different. She sees the light in the kitchen window. She left the lamp there when she left that morning. She sees the toy car on the porch that Ju Wan forgot. She sees the open door of the second-floor study, where Yejun Omon works in the evenings. Ju Wan takes her hand. Come on, he says. I'll show you what I found in the park today. He drags her to the house. Cherine follows him, feeling her hand warm in his small one. Yejun follows behind. He's not in a hurry. He looks at Che. Rin, to the sun, to the house. Che Rin steps onto the porch and turns around. She sees Yejun in this evening sunlight. No suit, no stern expression, just a man looking at her and smiling. She smiles back. It's warm inside the house. It smells of the dinner she cooked this morning. Ju Wan runs to his room to get his new find, a heart-shaped stone he picked up on the path. Cherin walks into the hallway and takes off her jacket. She hangs it on a hook next to Yejun's jacket, and Ju Wan's small jacket. 3 jackets hang nearby. 3 pairs of shoes stand by the threshold. Cherin looks at this and understands. This house stopped being a place of work. It became her home. A real one, where she was expected, where she was heard, where she was needed. She hears footsteps behind her. Yejun comes closer. Do you like it? He asks, pointing to 3 jackets in a row. Cherin nods. Very. Yejun looks at her. There's something in his eyes that she can now read. Tenderness. Welcome home, Che. Rin, he says. She looks at him, at his face, illuminated by the warm light of the hallway, at the tattoo on his neck, which now seems to her simply a part of him, at his arms, hanging calmly by his sides, without tension, without readiness for defense. Thank you, she says, for everything. The sound of little feet comes from the hallway. Ju Wan runs out with a pebble in her hand. Look, he shouts. It looks like a heart. This is for you, Che. Rin. He hands her the stone. Che Rin takes it. The stone is smooth, warm from her child's hands. I will take care of it, she says. Like all your treasures. Ju Wan beams. He grabs her hand and pulls her into the kitchen. Let's go have dinner. I want to tell you about the ducks. Cherin follows him. She feels Yejun's gaze on her. She turns around. He's still standing in the hallway, looking at her, not looking away. Cherin smiles. He smiles back. She turns and walks into the kitchen, where a boy who calls her family is waiting for her, where the dinner she cooked is waiting for her, where her new life is waiting for her. Cherin is no longer a maid in someone else's house. She's at home. 2 months pass. Cherin sits in the kitchen with a cup of tea. It's getting dark outside, and Ju Wan's drawings are scattered across the table. The boy has just finished coloring a new city, tall buildings made from boxes they'd been building together all week. Now the city stands in his room, on a special table Yejun had ordered specifically for the project. The front door opens. Che Rin hears footsteps in the hallway. Yejun returns earlier than usual. He walks into the kitchen and stops in the doorway. He looks at her, at the drawings, at the city of boxes visible from the hallway. It was a difficult meeting today, he says. Do you want some tea? Asks Che. Rin. He nods. She stands up to pour, but he comes closer and takes the cup himself. Their fingers almost touch again. Is Ju Wan sleeping? He asks. He fell asleep half an hour ago. He was showing me his city. He said he now has everything he needs. Yejun looks at her. In his eyes is something she now sees every day. Calm, trust, something else that neither of them can yet say out loud. Do you have everything you need? He asks. Cherin looks at the kitchen where they sit in the evenings, at the drawings on the table, at the 3 cups standing in the drying rack, at the small jacket hanging on a chair. Yes, she says. I have one. Yejun puts down his cup and extends his hand, slowly, giving her time to back off if she wants. Cherin doesn't back down. He takes her hand, quietly, without words, just holding. I'm glad you stayed, he says. Che-rin looks at their joined hands, at his fingers squeezing hers, at the old scar under his thumb. Me too, she says. A floorboard creaks on the second floor. Ju-won, who should be sleeping, peeks out from behind the railing. He sees them standing in the kitchen. He sees their hands. Dad, he whispers, are you going to live together now? Yejun looks at Che-rin. She looks at him. Yejun says, not letting go of her hand, we will! Ju-won grins widely and disappears into the hallway to fall asleep again. For real this time. Che-rin stands in the kitchen of the house that has become her home, next to the man she has learned to trust. A few steps away from the boy who considers her family, she doesn't go anywhere anymore. This is her place, her people, her life, and this is just the beginning.